was in Prairie Lights bookstore in Iowa City last week, and a woman came up to me and she said, "I thought you were someone else." And my response was, "I used to be somebody else." But now I'm retired. At a disciple event in Memphis, Tennessee, there you go. Okay. At a disciple event in Memphis, Tennessee, I was riding an elevator with another gentleman who I knew to be disciple because of the name tag. And we exchanged greetings with one another. And finally he turned and said to me, "Well, what do you do?" And with unwarranted pride, I said, "I am director of stewardship with the Church Finance Council." And he looked at me and smiled with a glint in his eye, and he said, "I'm sorry." What he and I both knew is what Douglas Ann had just talked about, that there's a lot of tension and a lot of uncertainty and sometimes turmoil around money, specifically when it comes to stewardship and stewardship in congregations. And so that's a beginning place sometimes of how do we begin to address that. And so I want to offer some specific ideas, 3, and I have some handouts that I'll put over there to illustrate those, as well as illustrating them up here in a little bit. But scripturally, I was looking for some way to understand how congregations deal with the uncertainty and with some of the stresses around money, specifically in stewardship, specifically also with congregations. And one way was the passage that many of you I know are familiar with from 1 Corinthians, the 4th chapter, verses 1 to 2, which says, "Think of us in this way, as servants of Christ and stewards of God's mysteries. Moreover, it is required of stewards that they be found trustworthy." And so that is a foundational piece. I'm called to be creative. I'm called to be innovative. I'm called to be everything to everybody sometimes, but none of that matters unless I'm found to be trustworthy because I serve a trustworthy God. While it does not speak directly to what I want to talk about, it does build upon the foundation of stewardship coming into the realm of talking about what is trustworthy. Congregationally, as Douglas Ann said, and I'm probably going to refer back to her because we overlap in many ways, I think one of the most important things that we can do in a congregation is create a culture of gratitude. That begins with our language about how do we even talk with one another about this? How do we talk about stewardship and our giving? If we talk about it with reluctance and dread, then that's the culture that we begin to perpetuate. But if we can talk about it with gratitude, as my friend down here said a little bit early, just say thank you sometimes. Find all the ways that we can express gratitude to God, but certainly to one another. First of all, I'd like to make a distinction, and I think you can change that, to the distinction between fundraising and stewardship. Fundraising, just in general and classically, is that fundraising is the need of the institution or the congregation to receive. Stewardship is the need of the giver to give. Both of those are two separate things, and yet they are joined in a very significant way, and they need one another, especially for supporting and underwriting our ministries and our mission. They come together, but they are unique, and both of them have a very important role. The final word that I use is financial stewardship when I talk about stewardship, because as soon as you begin talking about stewardship, somebody will say, but that means a lot of things. It means the care of the land. It means the care of relationship, and they're exactly right, because stewardship is just a general word about how we care for what's been entrusted to us by God and to one another. And so in doing that, we can talk a little bit more specifically about it being financial stewardship that we want to talk about. The first thing I want to talk a little bit about is something that's been around for a while in many different forms, and it is money autobiography. And if you stop right there just a second, some of you have heard of that before, but the one I have, the form I have, and over here has 22 questions and some sub-questions in each one of those. But in the midst of those questions, it's how do we talk about money, not just money in church, but I think in a time of COVID when many are in transition, many people have left jobs, many people have started cottage businesses, and the stresses of those because there's some uncertainty in the transitions. Stock market, I check every morning because I'm an anxious person, but I check that, and I know that has raised the anxiety level of pastors and congregations and our members. And so that's one of the keys. How can we talk with our members about money without it always being about how much they give to the church? Because money is on everybody's mind. I would imagine that sometime yesterday or today you've had to make a financial decision, whether it's buying gas, which gas station to stop at, or something else along the way. Money is on our minds all the time. So how can we breach the silence and just simply begin talking about it? If you want to go to the next, there are 3 questions here, and I don't know which ones I put up. These are just samples of the questions that are in there. What is your earliest recollection of earning money? What does the Bible say about money? Has money ever hindered a family or friendship relationship? Where is there secrecy regarding money in your life? These are examples at 3 different places in the money autobiography. The earliest ones are about recollections and just memories. The second one are about experiences. And the third section is about values, about money. We've used this in different congregations. Sometimes we use it with worship leaders who are giving a stewardship moment just to stimulate their thinking about persons and events and places in their life that have been impacted by money. It's also used, and I've used it with classes, where we invite everyone to write 2 or 3 sentences in answer to every one of those questions. And then we come together sometime later, and they can share any of those as we go through them, but they're not required to, because some of these are very difficult questions. And in doing that, we opened up conversations. One of the young girls, or actually she was a young woman, 30, that talked about what's your earliest recollection of earning money, and she talked about picking up cigarette butts in the motel parking lot that her parents owned, and she got a penny apiece for a cigarette butt. But she started crying, and she remembered that. But opening up conversations about what's personal to us and alive in us can begin to open up conversations in our congregations. So that's one thing. Just simply the samples that we have, the sample questions, and look through those. Where might you use that with elders, with a stewardship committee, or with a circle of friends that can be really open with one another? Understanding not everybody's going to answer every question or at least share what they've done, but we encourage them to write it down. So money autobiographies have been around for some time, but I think still very valuable. Don't do it yet. The next part that I wanted to do is self-assessment. The first part is about growing stewards and about our personal lives with money. The second part is congregationally, our stewardship and financial stewardship lives in the congregation. What does that look like? How are we doing with that? So the second piece I have is a self-assessment tool for congregations that also gives a variety of questions. Again, Douglas Ann mentioned that you need to ask questions. So this is for a congregation, a board, again, elders or governing body of some type, or a stewardship committee to begin answering some of the questions. The categories for those are leadership around financial stewardship, communication, offering, teaching, giving, policies and practices, financial transparency, an annual emphasis, attitudes and personal finances. And it can be given to any one of those groups to begin conversation. And if you want to do the next slide. Next one, there you go. They are statements, and you respond to each statement on a continuum of 1 to 5. Our newsletter articles regularly encourage giving. True or not true? You can keep going with some of the questions. The regular offering is an important part of our worship. Children and youth are intentionally invited to give. Looking at that second one, so often, and it's an increasing practice that we put the offering somewhere out in the narthex, and people give because during COVID we didn't pass, and it's a very logical thing to do. The question is, how do we bring it into worship? How do we still make it a part of offering? Because we use different terms, and I would encourage you not to use the term gifts. They're offerings. Gift has an entirely different connotation than offering does. Offering is a response to God. A gift, we give to one another, but there's expectations with that sometime. So that sense of gratitude in presenting ourselves before God. So I encourage the use of the word offering, but also making it a part of worship. Robert, you can go on. We have a clear memorial and gift policy. A lot of congregations don't know if they do. They think maybe they do, and some do have very clear policies and are able to follow it. But having that type of foundational to build upon with stewardship ministries, financial stewardship ministries related to gifts that come into the church, especially as you want to encourage more giving. Go on, Robert. And there's a spirit of joy in our giving. Is there a spirit of joy in your congregations around giving? Whenever I do a stewardship moment, I begin by saying, have I got good news for you? It's time to receive our morning offering. And people chuckle, and it lifts up, at least in spirit, just a little bit to change the atmosphere around this. But is there joy in what we're doing? And finally, our expectations of givers clear. Congregation in Indianapolis made it clear what they expected of their members. If you've been a member 1 to 3 years, we expect you to give 1 to 3% of your income. If you've been here 4 to 7 years, we expect you to give at least 5%. If you've been here over 7 years, we expect you to tithe. Their giving grew dramatically because people knew that they could do that if they wanted to or if they were able to, and if they weren't, they didn't have to. But the congregation set clear expectations. I would also add that to mission, our special offerings, to have a goal. And if you reach it, great, celebrate it. If you don't reach it, tell people thank you. I know we've done what we can possibly do right now. We'll do it differently next time, or maybe better next time, but always in the positive. So I think the statement serves to provide focus and direction and what's next. The final thing I want to talk about, mention again, Douglas Ann referred to, and it's 3 kinds of budgets. The fiscal budget is what I grew up with, and most of all of us know. It's the financial. It has a ton of numbers on that thing. It's expenses and receipts and bottom lines on those things. And that's absolutely necessary for fiscal accountability in a congregation. But it does almost nothing to inspire giving in a congregation. We hand them out, send them out in letters, but I don't know about you, but I never looked at one to determine how I was going to respond in my own giving. So another part of that complements that is the narrative budget, as Douglas Ann said, the story around that, to illustrate it. What is this? And for example, with salaries, we were able to give an increase, or we're not able to give an increase, and explain why. People want to know the story around it, and it has minimal numbers on it, maybe just a number for each category of your budget. We handed that out and asked people, after seeing this, how many of you would like to have the fiscal budget? We had one person who said they wanted to see it, but we always posted it so everybody would always be able to see it because we wanted to be transparent. But it's not what people were interested in. They wanted to know what's going on in the life of the church. The third one that I would suggest is, what's the third one? Is visual. Because it's up there? Cool. I'm a visual learner. I need to see it. If somebody starts telling me a story, I just soon say, show it to me or draw me a picture of it. Then I'll understand it. Visually, for example, we created a bulletin board because we had a budget line item that said postage. So we created a bulletin board and showed all the ways that postage was used in the congregation for bereavement cards, for letters to folks who had been ill and away. We use postage in a variety of ways, and we just illustrated that. Social media allows many more opportunities like that for Facebook or website pages or tweets, whatever you want to do to begin to illustrate how are these gifts used and to say thank you in the midst of that. It also lends itself, I think, to stewardship committees that, again, I grew up with stewardship committees that were always the local banker, the insurance agent, the people that knew, accountants usually, that knew finances. And God bless them, they helped us because they knew numbers. But we also needed on there people that could tell stories and people that wrote wonderful letters to people because they could illustrate the story just in their writing and narrative. And thirdly, having people on the committee that know how to bring pictures alive and know social media in a sense that can share those things. But that lets the congregation know who are there on Sunday morning or those who haven't been able to attend that they're part of this. And each one of those starts with a sense of gratitude. This is who we are. This is what we're doing, and hopefully to open up conversations around that. So our fourth one, again, we come back to the beginning. Think of us in this way, as trustworthy in all these things, what we say and in what we do, which is essential when you talk about money, especially money in light of our faith and in God's witness among us. And so I'm deeply grateful for you all. And I have a third handout that actually is a sheet that shows all the different sources of income that you receive in your congregation. Cedar Falls did this when I was pastor there, and we came up with 22 different ways we receive money into the life of the congregation. We took where it's coming from, how much it usually was over a year, who was responsible for administering that, and how we used it for our mission and ministry of the church. So that's another handout just as an aside. So thank you very much.